This is Washington's Drive at 5. Today's top stories, in depth, breaking news, and traffic and weather every 10 minutes first on the 5s. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL. Salutação de naszym dziadom
Sowietami. This stirring national anthem of the Soviet Union. Of course, this is a relic of the Cold War era, but it seems like Vladimir Putin, clearly inspired by that era, trying to get the band back together, maybe get that harmony going. As Russia continues to make their way around Eastern Europe and, frankly, treat Western Europe and the United States diplomatic effort as a joke, we thought it would be time to go back to that Cold War era, back when the U.S. actually showed leadership in the world and actually was able to bring Russia to its knees. Joining us right now is Bud McFarlane, former National Security Advisor under Ronald Reagan, one of the architects of that winning strategy. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Always a pleasure, Larry.
Well, I'm sure you heard the president's remarks today about further sanctions. I just mentioned that basically 4 months after his first sanctions, he's now appearing to get serious, or saying that he's getting serious. Is this really the right way to go to intimidate Vladimir Putin and try to keep him from doing what he wants in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we never would have gotten to this state of affairs, Larry. There would have been a very solid foundation in policy, both political, economic, and military, that would have established a clear evidence for Putin to see that he was up against a very strong country with very strong leadership, founded on grassroots popular support that comes from a strong economy that provides jobs, and finally, peace always rests on strength. A very strong military. The bottom line for Putin would be that if he got into a tangle with the United States, that he would lose politically, economically, and militarily. But you have to have done that homework and understand what it takes to deter this kind of behavior by a foreign leader, and work with allies as well as the Congress and the American people to put forth policies of strength. Peace comes from strength, ultimately. You don't have to go looking for a war, certainly not. But from a strong political, economic, and military foundation, you're going to deter this kind of behavior.
Yeah. Given that, and thank you for that explanation, I mean, let's get to that question of strength. Do you agree that when the president first began his term in 2009, his first term, it seemed like two of his major moves toward Russia was to send Hillary Clinton over there with that ridiculous reset button, and then to unilaterally withdraw the missile defense from Poland and the Czech Republic? What kind of message of strength or weakness did that send?
Well, it was a very pitiable performance. My gosh, at a time when we should have been signaling to our allies that we're with them and are going to continue to lead the alliance, instead we pull the rug out from under them and take away a policy of missile defense, which wasn't even oriented toward Russia. It was oriented toward a possible Iranian attack. But to do that certainly demonstrated a weakness toward our allies, and it signaled Putin that we were going to unilaterally disarm without getting anything in return. So it was misguided from the beginning.
So knowing what we know now, and obviously you're saying, the reason we got here is because of 5.5 years of failed policy, what could be done now? I mean, if he had the right advisors around him, we want the president to succeed, we want Western Europe to be able to help the people of Ukraine, what could be done right now?
Well, these sanctions are a step. However, this really ought to be seen as an opportunity. Whenever we have evidence of this kind of aggressive behavior, it offers the kind of evidence that allies need to renew what we had when we used to be able to deter this sort of thing, to rally NATO, to rebuild our strength, to conduct operations and exercises with them, and to stand up with a policy agenda that gets to the kind of origin of this crisis. energy, for example.
Well, I was going to ask you. I mean, you're the co-founder of the U.S. Energy Security Council, and it seems like Russia's energy is a real big carrot that is motivating a lot of the European nations.
Europe is very vulnerable because of its reliance upon Russian oil and gas. Ukraine was the transit point, but also reliant upon Russian gas, when indeed Ukraine has enormous natural gas resources that Russia has never allowed them to develop. We could have called together our alliance, put together a sensible Western Europe energy policy that relies upon developing resources that are there. Ukraine has 400 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in its country. We have made a huge success in our country of developing that gas out in Wyoming and New Mexico. It's called coal bed methane. We ought to be able to do that with a public-private partnership in which BP, Total, Exxon, and others get behind launching that kind of development. And it could be putting gas online here within a year or two and take away this kind of continuing vulnerability.
Robert McFarlane, before I lose you, and I'm almost out of time, we started the day learning that the U.S. is accusing Russia of violating that 1987 missile treaty. That's the one famously that President Reagan said, we got to trust but verify. You were part of those discussions. Is there a major danger here with this violation?
Well, if you let them get away with it, it is. There's a formal treaty in place ratified by our Congress to get rid of an entire class of weapons. Cut and dried, no ambiguity about it. If you test this kind of weapon, it's against the law. So you have to put in place the kind of call for accountability from Putin and to say that if this is typical of what you intend to do, violating other treaties and continuing aggression, we'll have to look seriously at sanctions that go well beyond where we are and simply put in place alternative sources of energy, prohibitions on dealing with any Russian corporations, especially financial institutions, and ultimately look at kind of the nuclear option, which is cutting off all trade.
Robert McFarlane, we got to leave it there. Ronald Reagan's National Security Advisor, thank you so much for lending your wisdom and insight to this. What do you think? Do you think Barack Obama has it in him? Is it too late, or do you think that he could actually employ some of those Reagan-era